Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Why Community Matters webinar series. Today, we are thrilled to be speaking with Sandra Miller from Democracy Earth about why blockchain is a social movement. Hi, Sandra.
Hi there.
My
Thanks
name
for
is
having me.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Judy Gordon. I am the VP of Marketing for OmniSparx, and we also have with us Joe Hernandez from the Chicago Blockchain Project. Hi, Joe.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hello. I'm also in the chat.
So today, I just want to give a quick introduction to the sponsors. OmniSparx is a community engagement platform driving crypto project growth. For more information, visit omnisparx.io. The Chicago Blockchain Project is a trusted resource building Chicago to be the blockchain capital of the world. And now I want to turn it over to Sandra. Sandra, thank you so much for joining us. And tell us more about how blockchain can help change the world.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Judy and OmniSparx and Disruption Joe and Chicago Blockchain Project for inviting us here. When Joe first sent out the invitation to the series on behalf of OmniSparx and Chicago Blockchain Project, we saw that we could approach it from a point of view of how we're building an amazing community, including our ambassadors and student ambassador program, because Democracy Earth has a really remarkable community. Like any blockchain project, we're sort of nothing without our community, right? But we thought it might be more interesting to take a step back and focus on the building block of community, and that is the role that identity plays in forming communities that we can trust. So how to deploy democracy over the internet is our mission at Democracy Earth Foundation. And the code name of our product, which we'll be launching on the mainnet on March 1st, if you don't mind that commercial, is Sovereign. And it is a decentralized app that makes easy and accessible the ability to interact with blockchains for the purpose of governance. And whenever I talk about democracy, in my mind, it's sort of like the word community comes in. So almost anytime I say democracy, I think you can substitute community and it be, perfectly legitimate in a way to understand the concepts we're talking about. Because democracy happens in any organization, right? So our concern is, how do we divorce that concept of democracy from nation states that have historically organized democracy and push it down, right, lower, like into the social graph, where there's no centralization or control. So that's Democracy Earth. And Joe suggested the topic, the title of our presentation, and it was because he overheard our CEO say this at one time, where he said, blockchain doesn't just enable social movements. Blockchain is a social movement. You do read a lot about social impact projects in the blockchain space, often with a lot of skepticism. The ICO bubble of 2017 led many onlookers in the space to do this sort of when Lambo kind of thinking. And that obscured the social movement beginnings of Bitcoin and blockchain. And we like to think that we kind of go back to those beginnings. So why do we say that blockchain is a social movement? Well, just to remind everybody, here is the first block, January 2009. You can see hashed right onto by Satoshi Nakamoto himself or themselves or herself, chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. When I look at that, I think that is Satoshi Nakamoto talking to a community. And what is a community? Well, a community is, I want to share an interesting perspective that community per se doesn't exist. It's a perception, right? So a community is emergent. A community is a perception of a perceived connection between a group of people, okay, and they have overlapping interests. Those might be intent or to do something. It might be identity. You're part of a group, perform something together, an interest or an experience. The one thing, so when a community emerges when there's overlaps between these aspects of self among members of a group. And that's when a community emerges. And so I think that we can definitely think of the blockchain community, people who buy Bitcoin, as a community under that definition. What a community isn't, you notice, and we're going to come back to this in a second, because it really does have a lot to do with understanding the threats to our democracy and identity online. One thing a community isn't, by definition, is place. Okay, and we're going to come back to that. So community doesn't just mean place or merely like a membership. And we're going to talk about some social media that really put that into perspective for us. So I believe that the formation of blockchains, and another reason that they are a social movement, is that blockchains themselves are organizations. And I think that they will come to redefine how we see communities, how we define them, and how we count ourselves among them. And so I think that the political experience, I want to call attention to the fact that Democracy Earth is doing some work with the group Radical Exchange, and our CEO, Santi Siri, just recently was on a podcast, Laura Shin's Unchained podcast, which is excellent. If those who are unfamiliar with it, I'm promoting the heck out of it here. It's a great Bitcoin podcast, and Laura just had on Glenn Weil, who co-wrote Radical Markets with Santi Siri. And they were talking about community and democracy, among other things, and got into some great detail. So please give that a listen. But one of the things they said that I just wanted to pull forward was that they said the political experiment of the 20th century was communism, and that experiment failed. They tried it everywhere. It's still being tried in some places, but it was pretty much a failure. But the political experiment of the 21st century is going to be blockchain. And I find that very interesting, given that blockchains are organizations, and they are going to very much like define how we see communities. And the reality is that we're all part of multiple communities, and we should have the freedom to choose which ones we're part of. I like in Radical Markets, I'm going to pull forward a very relevant concept from that book, where Glenn Weil and Eric Posner, the authors, talk about polities. I think I'm saying it right. It's a sort of a made up word that is real. And that is that a future where they sort of imagine for us, where citizens are members of hundreds of different communities, okay? And communities are actually the owners. There's not private property ownership. There's common ownership forms. And what makes you unique, what gives you sort of your identity, would be the set of communities that you're a part of, that you gain value from, and that you are part of the governance of. So, in Radical Markets, they see a future, and I say that Democracy Earth is right along that vision, that communities are going to provide for a lot of our needs. They're going to contribute. We're going to contribute to the governments and governance of those communities. And we see, a real radically democratic, radically decentralized definition of communities that should come to pass. But before that does, we have to deal with the threats to democracy that we're dealing with now, and we're going to get into how identity and communities come into play here. So the biggest threat to democracy is right now. I'm going to show you this picture, and this picture is very creepy because none of these people actually exist. These are faces that were generated by algorithms with like a 95% accuracy. So in other words, humans seeing these it's called the generative adversarial network. Humans that see masks generated in this way through these algorithms, 95% of the time, see it as an actual human. They don't spot that it's not. And this is AI, right? This is our biggest threat to democracy. That we're not sure who's in our communities necessarily unless we understand their identity. And identity digitally is something very different than identity, that we experience in person, where we can verify with our eyes and with our experience of people and with their memberships in communities, like who they actually are. I would say that Facebook is probably the biggest threat to democracy, being the biggest purveyor of AI. And we see that the influence of AI in politics is getting stronger after every single electoral process. Facebook has sort of redefined how online that attention is the new currency, and AI is actually challenging the very nature of humanity, as we see from those pictures. So that's the frontier we have to draw online as we build communities and build democracy and look at membership of these communities. How do we identify humans and that are not created by AI? So Facebook has become the most influential political force in the modern world because it formalizes humans on the web. Now, Mark Zuckerberg calls Facebook a community. I wouldn't agree. I don't think that's an accurate word because, again, the only thing, the community of Facebook is, first of all, bigger than populations of India and China. It's bigger than Christianity. And it's run by basically a dictator. One man has all the power over it. That's not really a community. So nobody's voting on governance on Facebook. Sure, we do vote. Facebook is an advertising company. So with every like, we're giving a preference and we're voting. But those votes are not serving any purpose except to the financial benefit of the advertiser. And that's something that we need to see change, obviously. So what we've learned at Democracy Earth is whoever controls the identities controls the election. And that is something that has been very relevant as we watched Facebook be invaded by foreign forces and by misinformation and disinformation, fake news they call it, or gossip. And clearly did have an impact not just on the American presidential election, but on a number of elections around the world. So who controls the registry becomes a very important question. And right now, what we're looking at is that Facebook is more or less controlling the registry as a centralized advertising company. So how dangerous is that? Let's talk about that for a second. I think everybody has probably seen at least one video of a person, like in China, I saw this, but I hear it in the US all the time. I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't think there's anything, as long as I'm not doing anything wrong, why do I care about centralization? Well, let's talk about that. How bad is centralization? Because real questions are now being asked about how we manage identity in the digital realm. So we see, for example, here on this page, it's pretty bad. How bad, how at risk are our identities, in the current centralized world. We see, here, Facebook, 50 million users, LinkedIn, 6.5 million users, Uber, here, Equifax. There is an aggregation of 1.5 billion identities. That's a combination of email and passwords from 2012 and earlier. And these are actually accessible. It's a 45 gigabyte file, and you can access it by BitTorrent. And if you're wondering if your email and password is in there, the answer is yes, it is. There's about an 89% chance, I think, that our developers figured out that there was that your identity's been compromised. And here's a little proof. So our CEO, Santi Siri, is an Argentine, so he checks generally for the president of Argentina, Mark Zuckerberg, everyone on our team, everyone he knows, and then notifies us when he finds our identities hacked online. And what you're seeing here is a result of one of those searches. Not everybody knows this, but Mark Zuckerberg is colorblind. He cannot distinguish the colors red and green, which leads us to believe that some of these hacked passwords are in fact his. And that really raises an eyebrow and causes you to question, if even Mark Zuckerberg, can't be safe from the tools he has wrought, what chance do the rest of us have? So knowing this, that who controls the registry, kind of controls democracy, if you will, means that, what we need is a consensus mechanism for human participants, similar to what Facebook has done, but decentralized and able to identify non-human participants and keep them out. So that is what Democracy Earth is all about. as formalizing humans on the blockchain, but doing so in a way where we can trust our communities. Right? I don't think anybody really trusts their community when you talk about Twitter and you talk about Facebook, because we often don't even really know who we're talking to. That can't happen in a democracy. That can't happen in most of the communities we belong in, where there's governance happening. So it becomes a very important, not just important, but kind of key issue to just getting to governance and democracy in a decentralized way. This is a step we have to take. So what does formalizing humans on the blockchain mean? Well, key to figuring out how we can encode identity on decentralized networks is proving that you are human. So on the left here, we see GoBots, so that you're not a robot, that you're not AI, proving that you are singular, not a sybil, not a person in control of multiple keys. And also, free from coercion, like bribes. So how will we do that? So to defeat corruption, what we need is decentralized, what we'll call self-sovereign, sybil-resistant citizenship or membership, of communities. And to do that, the way Democracy Earth is approaching this is through something we call Turing impossible proofs. So Turing impossible proofs is something that requires enough bandwidth that exceeds commonly available computing capacity, factoring in also human judgment. So not unlike when we do a CAPTCHA online, a Turing impossible proof, when we see an example of one here on the left, this is Roma Siri, who is now 3 years old. When Roma Siri was born, she became the first citizen hashed onto the blockchain by her father, Santi Siri, our CEO. And you can see that by searching CoinDesk. Maybe Joe can share the link or after this presentation. But if you search for dad on the blockchain, meet the dad on the blockchain, it's a CoinDesk article. You can read about the whole thing, or just follow the Democracy Earth Twitter, and you'll be able to get to that media. And what Santi did is he took a video of his daughter and witnesses who identified themselves on video with certain information that they provided, and then he hashed this proof to the blockchain, videotaping that at the same time too. And so therefore, we had Santi declaring, that Roma Siri is a person before any official institution or nation state could do it. It could be private, such a thing can, or it can be public. That's his choice. So the first step to the decentralized sybil-resistant citizenship is the Turing impossible proof, and then for Democracy Earth, we are issuing a vote token, which will have many utilities, and one of them will be a voting consensus on this Turing impossible proof. So we will use our actual voting token to create a reputation-based trust graph that allows us to grant each other or affirm each other on a peer-to-peer level membership in the community or citizenship in the community. And once we've done that, then in the Democracy Earth network, an ERC 725 identity token is issued. And you can make the claim now, you are a non-sybil human. And that is like the brief process. And this is why we one of the main reasons that we want to break apart identity from the nation state is because there are so many people in the world that under this current paradigm do not have an identity. So the world currently has 65 million refugees. It's 1.1 billion citizens, according to the World Bank, that actually lack a formal identity. So this process that we're talking about here is a way for these people to have an identity that is not dependent on nation state that can take it away or that they can lose. Hi, Judy.
Hey, Sandra, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So how will this identity be shared? So in other words, will other projects be able to leverage this token or identity, or is this only for use in your platform?
It's a really interesting question because our platform is a crypto governance platform. And that means that any token will work on it. So you don't have to have a Democracy Earth vote token in order to participate in the network. In fact, right now, versions of our platform are being used by crypto companies with, and Blockstack is one of them, and they're using their own tokens. Like, so Blockstack is using stacks to use the Democracy Earth platform for governance of their app mining program. What I anticipate is that as this social graph grows, that we will see other organizations, other institutions, and even other blockchains wanting to use this our identity as an identity verifier. Not unlike the way we see people using social media right now. So, for example, if you log on to, if you're a part of Keybase, you indicate that you're a member of LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, and they have all kinds of different, organizations or communities that you can indicate that you're a member of. And, it's up to any institution, but depending on the strength of that validation or that citizen verification, you could see that becoming, a de facto identity. So right now, you don't see Twitter being a de facto identity because, right, you could be, who knows who that person really is behind there. But here we've been, with the ERC 725 token issued by the Democracy Earth Network, that this is a person who's been validated by other communities, and it's regularly updated. So you're not talking to a Sybil, you're not talking to a bot. So I see that having a lot of value, beyond simply the Democracy Earth Network.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So the way this works is once you have your ERC 725 identity, this now gives you the privilege to have our tokens granted to you, a time-based token based on elapsed time, where 1 hour of time equals 1 hour token. This time-based token gets issued to you on a 10% basis as a kind of a UBI, if you will. So you immediately have liquidity to participate in the market. The other 90% of your time has to be purchased. So we see that time and population now serve as natural ceilings for, total tokens out there, and defining what the scarcity is going to be and what the supply is going to be. And so other organizations can buy the other 90% of your time, and as that time goes on over time, that initial price is set at kind of like a global hour rate for an hour, and that will go up as the marketplace sees fit. Now, the hour token, as it comes to you, just minted, all you have to do is basically, exist over time. It will quadratically mint vote tokens to you. So you are granted vote tokens because you have successfully proved yourself as a non-civil, non-bot human being, receiving our tokens as time passes, and you're a member of the network. You automatically get granted at a quadratic basis these vote tokens. And then that vote token, as I said, has many uses. Of course, it can be used for voting, but has also the utility of verifying by consensus human identity on the network. So that's just kind of a summary of how this works. You can have a look at basically the interface, which you do not have to get an ERC 725. This is just the Ethereum Rinkeby testnet. It's available right now, testnet.democracy.earth. So go out there, and you will have to have a MetaMask login. It is a Web3 login, so no personal information is collected. And you can experiment, with the application. And we will be going live on the mainnet with the introduction of our token, targeted for the end of the week, March 1st. So this is Democracy Earth in summary. This is the way that we're looking at using blockchains which are power structures, right? Blockchains are power structures, and power structures require good governance, which is by definition democracy, I think. We're building systems of trust using these power structures. And basically, what we can see now is that institutions are that what we're seeing is cryptographic proof instead of the words of a politician, right? We're seeing institutions being collections of processes that become guaranteed by mathematical structures of blockchains versus individuals. So I think that in sort of a summary of the ERC 725. This kind of becomes like your passport, I guess you could say. So we now have a decentralized version of like sort of the Facebook graph, but without the Facebook problems of centralization and not knowing if people are symbols or bots, and coercion resistant. We now know that anybody on the network passes this first question of the protocol: are you human? We can deploy this wherever identity, not just for democracy and for voting and for decision making in communities, but wherever identity is being denied. And there are, as we talked about, many communities where this is the case. So being able to effectively signify a legitimate identity without revealing your identity is extremely important to communities that are living under authoritarianism. So this is one of, I think, like the more compelling use cases to be thinking about. And so I guess you could maybe in summarize say that our main metric then would be inclusion. I wanted to just wrap up here. Someone once asked me what would be the most radical possibility of democracy Earth and this protocol. And I would say, I'm going to go to the Argentine author Borges, who said that someday we might be worthy of not having governments anymore, and that's what blockchain can bring us, right? It can bring us this this vision that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. This from Radical Markets. This this is a difficult word. I'm going to look it up real quick again. It's a polypolities, right? Where we are members of many communities, right? And we're contributing to the governance of all of these, but none of these communities need to be defined by physical borders, by physical actual barriers or controls, as we currently see with nation states, a model that is clearly failing. So I think blockchain technology is really exciting because it's enabling these new institutional models for consolidating global communities. It makes actually the possibility of a global community addressing global issues like climate change and terrorism and refugeeism workable and governable. And to sort of wrap up, I think I remember once. I don't remember who said it. It might have been, it was someone like it was a scientist, but he was making a comment about, can religion and science really coexist? And he said, sure, I don't see any problem with them coexisting. He said they are non-overlapping magisteria. And I think that that blockchain enables us to see communities as actually overlapping magisteria. And imagine a Venn diagram where every community that you're a part of, and you're sort of like sitting there in the center of it, right? So in a way, we don't really have an identity. We have memberships of communities, and we want to break away from centralized definitions of how we become members of those communities when those communities are meant to be democratic. And I think that's the future that blockchain brings us. And I think that's why it's very appropriate to see blockchain as not just enabling social movements, but it is in fact a social movement itself because of the way it enables communities to form democratically and govern themselves with complete confidence, even with the confidence they can have in person brought into the digital realm.
Thanks. Sandra, we have a question from the listeners. Someone asked if you guys are working with Decentraland. And so I'll just expand that can you tell us other projects you're working with? Yeah,
thank you for that. So right now our product market fit right now for Democracy Earth is crypto governance, providing crypto governance for basically any crypto community and able to use our platform as a layer and using their own coin. So I touched earlier briefly on Blockstack. They are one of our partners that is using our governance layer. So check out the Blockstack app mining program, where they give away $100,000 a month they're shipping to developers. And the way it works is the stakeholders who hold stacks vote on the usefulness and how much they like these apps that developers are developing on the Blockstack ecosystem. So Decentraland is a second crypto community that we'll be providing that governance layer for, and we'll be announcing that any day now, actually. So we've been working on it in the background, and I actually was working on this morning, just checking some things with the development team, and that should be later this quarter. So there are a few others right now that we're sort of in the process of working with. We're also talking to a lot of, as you might imagine, private election companies contact us, very interested, in kind of understanding more about how to do elections on the blockchain. But the crypto governance product market fit is Decentraland and Blockstack right now are kind of our main customers or partners that we're moving forward with, and more to be announced.
So are you saying that governments have reached out to you, or is it more?
Absolutely. So we have a number of movements that have reached out to us, and we have, I would say, almost weekly, somebody contacting us from a government where the nation state model is failing them. And I think that Pia Mancini made a very true statement when she said that, what we're doing, the democracy, probably could not have evolved out of a country like the United Kingdom or the United States or France, where the democracies, at least up until recently, have been working pretty well, where you would expect it to, I'm saying that with bad irony, but where you would expect such to emerge, or where people are having choices taken away from them, but they have an authoritarian, ism is creeping into their democracy. They've lost control, of their institutional participation, and but they have all of the tools sort of ready and waiting to be picked up. So, in Argentina, everybody's internet connected. They have smartphones. Democracy is not quite working so well. So it's maybe not such a surprise that that turned out to be the cauldron, if you will, of where all of this emerged. And I would, Venezuela, Nicaragua. We get contacted. Italy, Spain, Catalonia. We get contacts very regularly from people who are, currently existing in, in a nation state, in a state of failure, and looking for solutions. And so for these people, they are members of a community that the protocol we talk about, we're really thinking of them when we develop it, right? Because it's no small matter for someone in Venezuela to be able to, let's say they wanted to hold a parallel vote, for example, just online. It's a very dangerous thing to do, because the government tracks everybody by their ISP. And in Nicaragua, we had state police putting marks on people's doors after doing that. So, and then those people being disappeared. I'm talking to citizens who are telling me about this. So,
wow.
Who you are, protecting who you are while being part of a community is a very serious question for a lot of places in the world. And so that's where we really see, the beauty of, a peer-to-peer identity graph, broken free from the nation state as, a critical building block for.
Oh, okay. So that's a key piece of the identity. So while you prove that someone is a person, you don't prove who that person is. Is that a correct statement? Yeah,
you can still keep your anonymity, right? So you're sort of I like to use it's from a movie, but you're bona fide. You're bona fide by the community, in the community and of the community. And so, can be anonymous, but, not no one has to worry that it's a sybil or a bot or a troll of some sort.
Okay, that's great.
So my question is, since you guys are working around the world, and when you were here for Voice of Blockchain last year, we were talking about some of the candidates and stuff who were running on this liquid democracy kind of platform, saying that we're going to run as a candidate who is willing to use technology to kind of listen to what the constituents want. Rather than having my own particular views, I'm willing to run on behalf of people who want to participate and be able to prove that they've said something. And you guys have been, identity has always been a big piece of it. The mechanism design's been a big piece of it. And figuring out how to actually implement has been a big piece of it. And what kind of things, like even around the world, have you seen where the implementation is either a guiding thing because it's working well, or a guiding thing because here's a place that tried to implement identity and it was a big mistake? Stories that you can learn from.
Well, there's a lot of good examples. There's in Australia, and forgive me, I'm drawing a little bit of blank on the name, but they have an initiative where they have they assemble sort of citizen juries for legislation, though. So in the same concept of a jury, where people come together, hear evidence, and then make a judgment of whether what should happen. They bring people together randomly to vote on legislation. And it's been very successful, and there's a lot of leaders in this space, and David Shum is doing some really interesting work where they say not everyone needs to vote on every single thing, right? And liquid democracy can kind of help with that, because your representative can vote for you on some issues. You can delegate your vote to others who are more expert in some issues, and then you can vote on those things that you yourself feel compelled or capable of voting on. But I'm going to quote Glenn Weil quoting Hannah Arendt, where she said, one of the greatest benefits of the modern age is that everybody doesn't have to be political, that they can leave it to others, because there are effective systems in place. Now, she said that a long time ago. We're going through its period right now. But there's Podemos in Spain. And one of the things I've learned from reading these, the Pirate Party, the good things that they've done is they've amassed very large followings, relative to the traditional parties, right? So often a third party or someone kind of trying to break into power, they can't gain a big following. But both of these movements said that they learn from social media to keep the friction of joining very, very low, right? And then they could worry about who should have rights to vote, you know what I mean, or should be counted in certain things, later. There could be levels of participation, but remove the friction barrier. So they have 500, 600, 800,000 followers very quickly. And that's something that we've actively learned from, and you can actually see in evidence in our app. So I think MetaMask is getting more frictionless every day. And I think that we're not there yet, but I think that Democracy Earth is further down the road almost than anybody that you can see. You look anywhere, anyone doing it, decentralized voting, participation is kind of an issue, and people are trying to solve it. But one of the things our dev team is working on is making sure that the participation protocol on our platform is very much like a social media experience. It's very much like what we know is successful, the ask me anything threading. So it behaves very much like chat, like people expect it to, because that's what they've been primed to by the very apps that are destroying democracy, I might add. It's ironic that we have to mimic them and they're ruining everything. But so those are a couple of examples, we look at. And I think that we're going to keep seeing more and more experiments popping up all over, because there is not going to be one answer. I think that people get an idea sometimes that we're going to take our current system. If you're talking to an American, they're like, I can't see how this would work. Our current system would just flip to a new one. No, I think we're going to have to see a lot of experimentation, and we're seeing that around the country. Joe, you just mentioned that the candidates that are running on liquid democracy. So there was Nathan Altman was one. David Ernst. We saw ranked choice voting happening in Maine, and I'm seeing Justice Democrats is now talking about that becoming a official plank of their platform. That they want to move towards candidates So Justice Democrats says, what we want to do is we want to get very progressive candidates to run for office, and we're going to try to change the system from the inside. But we recognize certain key things that need to be changed are features of the system itself. Like, so this movement, they're very interested in pushing ranked choice voting, and we've seen some examples of that be very successful and get a lot of press. And as far as the using the internet to, for people to for parties to say, now I see, take the pulse of my constituency. That's how Democracy Earth got its start, with Partido de la Red in Argentina, the internet party. And we're starting to see signs of that springing up all around, even like here in the US. Like we even had a candidate that we'll be announcing pretty soon, or talking, who came to us and wants to run for Congress and is very interested in how to use our platform to talk to constituents in that same way. Like, how can I prove to everybody that I'm listening to voters? Voters have a place. So right now, if you want to talk to a congressperson, like, what do? It's very awkward, right? Because you go to the website, you find the phone number, you might call the phone number, maybe you might leave a message, you might send an email, but that's kind of it. Unless you like trek over to their office. It's not like a two-way communication. So I think it's pretty exciting to see this candidate and others like them, stepping forward and saying, we want to open it to a real two-way and be very accountable, to what people are saying. In some way, Twitter, like, it doesn't hold people accountable, but good use of Twitter, like I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez uses Twitter really well to like respond and keep people apprised. But those social media platforms aren't going to be appropriate for this kind of thing because, first of all, they're owned by individuals, right? And they're advertising platforms. So we're excited to see this candidate who is interested in using the platform to, take the pulse of her voters and be very accountable to it. We think we're going to see a lot more of these sort of experiments, not just, in the US, but everywhere. US is actually a little bit behind, but it's great to see that we're kind of finally picking up, getting more politically engaged in this way.
Speaking of Alicia Cortez, Josh, who made the Bitcoin comic handbook for us last year, actually has been getting a ton of press recently because he made an Alicia Ocasio-Cortez comic book. So I put a link up there. Just it's interesting. It's funny.
Oh, okay, I'll take a look at that. So yeah, I think that candidates like her are talking accountability and talking transparency, and so there's going to start being a lot more awareness and interest in the tools that are here, right, that are being built. So I expect there to be a real explosion of interest in new forms of representation and new forms of participation, that have been very successfully kind of suppressed, until very recently.
There was definitely, during the conversation we had on Monday night, we had a meet up with the Cook County CTO talking about voting and hacking. And we also had the state CIO at that event, and a couple other people were experts from the technology side. And it seemed to me that one of the clear things was that most of the voter fraud kind of issues are generally voter suppression. It seems like everybody who's inside on dealing with that kind of agrees on that side, that it's not a very political thing. It's turned into a political thing in terms of the fraud. And they said they catch the fraud a lot. People try it, and there just aren't those issues anymore. And it seemed that what we really needed to get to was a state where the chain of custody of taking like paper ballots seems to be a pretty steady thing that's actually fairly decentralized in the physical world, in that the voting, the election clerks each get a count of the total ballots. Then those have to be brought to the place. They're brought to a place using a certain technique and method. And there's lots of checks and balances on the chain of custody. And the concern that most of the technologists had was that if you were to try to vote on a blockchain, at this point, you even have to think about the hardware and the entire chain of custody that way. Are you susceptible to a man in the middle of attack of some sort? And that seemed to be where they said, like, okay, there's still more practical things that need to be solved. And I look at like Enigma doing like private computation, allowing the computation to happen where somebody could prove that it's them and be bona fide at the same time. And I think, we're on the way, but just calling for it without actually thinking it through all the way seems to be.
It's premature. Yeah. Calling for it without, we're not we're not ready yet, right? Like digital voting without blockchains and this identity puzzle like figured out, that might be useful for just sort of playtime purpose, like Facebook, right? But that's not useful for actual democracy, as we're all very painfully aware right now.
Well, for overseas voting, the chain of custody of ballots might not be as secure, where then the probability of something blockchain may actually increase your security odds or probabilities. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah, I think I get a lot of, look at the work of David Sham, who, he has some really interesting protocols that involve, that have to do with using paper ballots and keeping the chain of custody. I do think that you get a lot of argument in this space where people don't know much about blockchain will kind of immediately say, but paper's the safest. And that always makes me smile because in the chart I had earlier, I don't know if it had a picture, but our CEOs have collected, I think, maybe 9 or 10 photos that they've taken in person of ballot boxes on fire in different countries, just taken out back behind the school and burned up.
And that was a conversation.
And that's a form of custody, right? It's a form of custody of the registry.
Right, exactly.
It's a form of control of the voter registry. So whoever controls that registry, whether it's electronic or physical, it doesn't matter, right? Like you still have the same issues of that's the point of corruption.
So similar to like saying Bitcoin's adoption should be because people in Venezuela need it when your country has hyperinflating currency. Bitcoin doesn't seem that inflationary to you. In the same way, there was kind of a quote, I think it was a quote out of that podcast, if I'm not mistaken, where Santi said that that Democracy Earth is aiming to do to governance what Satoshi is doing to, or the voting mechanisms of Radical Earth powered through blockchain, or Radical Exchange powered through blockchains, can actually do to government mechanisms what Satoshi did to financial mechanism. But maybe you'd have it better than me.
Yeah, you can set up that tweet of the quip. I think that was roughly what he said, and I think he was that was from the Laura Shin Unchained podcast. Is that what you're?
Yeah. I put the link up there, and we're running out of time here, so I think that's probably a good place to cut it off. But you got plenty of place for people to reach out to you on there, and
so please, real quick, we're find us on Twitter at Democracy Earth and on Medium, and I have our Slack address up there, but actually we're starting to move away from Slack for some reasons that we've published on Medium, so you can check it out there. But please do go to testnet.democracy.earth and just have a sample of what censorship-resistant voting can look like. And
you're even on Facebook.
Yes, we are. We consider ourselves a Trojan horse in there.
Thank you so much, Sandra. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. And like Sandra said, reach out. Everyone on the webinar, reach out if you want to talk. So we are continuing our webinar series every other Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central. In 2 weeks, we'll have March 13th, Amy Vernon from Rivets, which is also working on a security and identity solution. And she's going to talk about managing a global community. And then on March 27th, we're going to have someone come, Chris and Elaine from Convex Legal, come and speak about legal issues with managing communities. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Oh, yes. And Joe, you want to talk about Voice of Blockchain?
Oh, yep. I just put the link up there so people can get in there. We're really excited to have Democracy Earth as our impact partner again this year. And we solidified the block. News as a nice trusted crypto source. So we have some great ethos aligned organizations working with us for it. So
great. Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.